Hi, hello, and welcome back to Body-Based Therapy. My name is Devraj. I wanted to make a video about addressing the question of how should we be breathing? Because I get a lot of people in this scene, understandably, talking to me about, nasal breathing and breathing through the mouth. And I just wanted to share some of my own insights and learnings over the years that I've been in this scene. The first thing this has only really come up in the last 5-10 years because there's been a lot of scientific research and then magazine articles on the back of that research, explaining that really we should be from early infancy breathing with our nose. Breathing with, meaning air should be coming in through the nose and not the mouth. And, it does seem like there's a lot of scientific evidence to back this up, and it's great. However, in being concerned about whether we're nasal breathing or mouth breathing, to me, it's a little bit overlooking something absolutely, gigantic. It's kind of overlooking the elephant in the room, which is actually in our normal day-to-day breathing habits, are we engaging our abdominal muscles? Because to me, this is what the rest of the mammalian line do. For a start, when they're just relaxed and doing their normal day-to-day stuff, they're breathing, their abdominals are engaged with the breathing. And learning to breathe with the abdominals, in fact only with the abdominals, is a standard medical treatment these days for conditions like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma and some other related, quite chronic lung conditions. And when we engage our abdominals in our daily breathing, you can feel the belly moving in and out, not when we're kind of, trying to focus on it and make it happen, but it's just happening naturally, then I think concerns as to whether the air is actually coming in through the nose or the mouth are really secondary. Great if you can do it through the nose, but the main thing, by far most important, is that you're engaging your abs when you breathe. And relating to the muscles that we should be using, it's also fine to be using our intercostal muscles, which are the muscles between our ribs. So the kind of, perfect breath that you might take whilst you're sitting doing your work, whatever it might be, assuming it doesn't require a lot of physical energy, will be only using, you feel abdominal movements and you feel this kind of widening of the intercostals, widening of the chest and relaxing of the chest as you exhale. That's kind of like perfect breathing. And then the second part of it is muscles that we shouldn't be using when we're breathing. And this includes certainly the sternocleidomastoid muscle coming down here from the sides of the throat down to the clavicle. And then the scalene muscles, I think there's about 3 of them, coming down and down to the side as well. Those muscles we really should not be using when we're breathing. In addition, the trapezius, which is, you probably know, a big muscle over the back of the shoulders coming round, and the pecs, here up in our chest, we puff out our pecs and we want to look a bit alpha. So when we're just taking the normal breath and we don't need a high amount of energy, we should not be engaging any of those 4 muscle groups at all, ideally. Which brings me to the reality when I see people doing their normal breathing, or that they're writing to me with concerns about their breathing and this kind of thing, or engaging me as a therapist, invariably they are using these muscles a lot, and then instead of bringing the focus lower down the body towards the abdomen and around the intercostals, they obsess on whether they're breathing through the nose and the mouth. And to me, it's like, okay, but you're missing the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room, which is, are you engaging these muscles down here, the abs, particularly the lower abs, and are you relaxing these muscles, not using them to engage? So for me, if you want to learn a good way to breathe, then you look at mammals, and then because we are mammals, we are primates, we're mammals, So then, you start to work using these muscles. And you start to breathe using these muscles, which can be quite a journey, and you start to relax these muscles, trying not to use them to breathe with. And then if you get that mastered, you can have your mouth slightly closed and you can use allow the air to come in through your nose. Now the second part of this video, I also wanted to look because there comes a crossover from all this scientific information on nasal breathing that's been coming out in the last decade into the therapy scene, where particularly with breathwork therapies like rebirthing, like Reichian breathwork, holotropic breathwork, Wim Hof breathing, shamanic breathing techniques from Frank Natali or whoever, he was one of the early guys back in the 90s and 80s. How should we be breathing then? And of course, these techniques have their own breathing style, most of which generally require using the mouth to breathe with. And this concerns a lot of people. When I make videos on some of these techniques, people often write to me, and like, I really want to try this technique, but I'm scared that it involves me to use mouth breathing, and I say to people, well, you can use your nose if you want to, but I do try to explain that the reason these kinds of techniques use mouth breathing, and they don't all use mouth breathing, but most of them do, is because that will get more oxygen into the body, into the lungs, and will energize the system. And the purpose of that is not just to wake us up. The purpose of that is to start to activate unconsciously held patterns, holding patterns in the muscle system and the body fascia. Fascia is your interconnecting tissue around inside your body, which tends to get rigid with age and should ideally still be flexible. And because there's so much holding in this and it increases over time, but we just keep doing it, invigorating your body with these breath techniques starts to loosen up some of that holding. You do these techniques, you get spasms, you get contractions. Maybe therapists, if it's a group session, come around and push on some of your muscle groups and you've got something to push against, and some of that holding comes out. So for those techniques, you really want to get more air in as a general rule. You want to get more air in. And the more you can oxygenate your system and then, move it into a release, then, the better the technique will be working. And, to my way of thinking, even if you're a total, because there is like a religious fervor now about nasal breathing in some people, it really has become like a religion to my mind. And then, they want to do breathwork techniques, but they're just terrified to even breathe with their mouth for like 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not a medically qualified person. I just really struggle to believe that is going to make, a negative impact on your life. And possibly you've become a little bit obsessed in some way, it's just gone on a very mental track with it, which we all do from time to time with things, because it's a quite different thing to be using a breath technique for 10 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. And how you actually, that's a technique that you do specifically for a relatively short period of time. And breathing, of course, as in day-to-day breathing, is something that we're doing all the time, and in fact, when we stop breathing, that's one of the main ways that someone can tell that we're not alive anymore. So I think it's good to appreciate that, that possibly if you're terrified to even use mouth breathing just for a 1 hour technique, well, you may have gotten a bit stuck with that, which can kind of happen if you just try to nose breathe, because one of the problems with science, and I'm actually a big fan of science, and you're much more likely to find me into neuroscience than traditional psychology, for example, as a body-based therapist. I'm into science. But one of the problems is it doesn't really have a psychodynamic aspect, and it's also in these very early days of studying these things. So science just looks at the body and says, okay, this person's not breathing right. They start breathing right, and then everything will be okay. That's the scientific perspective. But I don't think that's really accurate. And I think that will be borne out over the longer term, 5-10 years, because if you simply start nasal breathing and you haven't released any of the holding patterns that have accumulated in the times when you weren't nasal breathing or you were breathing with all the muscles around here, then all you're going to do is create this kind of very small island of feeling okayness. But as soon as anything comes along from the outside to shake it, you're going to be, you've become like a kind of, not use my arms very well here, but like a pyramid that's trying to balance on its tip. It's very unstable. It can't resist a lot of bashing. And we obviously want to have some resilience in our life, but we can take a bit of bashing, because the world is changing and there is bashing. So we want our pyramid to be more like that, traditionally resting on its base, and we don't get knocked around so much. So if you've only been practicing nasal breathing and you haven't been on a journey to clear out the holding, I think go for some mouth breathing, get some of that holding out, go back to your nasal breathing in your daily life, and all will be well. And it is quite a journey to come off this drug of using the muscles around here. Because another aspect of it is that when we're habitually using these muscles, scalenes and sternocleido, and our pecs are kind of involved in the breathing process, and maybe we've got our intercostals using a bit, but our abs not really, then that kind of keeps us in a fight or flight mode in an unhealthy way. It's hard for us to come down and relax. It's hard for us to get a real deep night's sleep. And so then if you're in that state and then you just get a little bit of amelioration, it gets a little bit better because you've learned nasal breathing, you still haven't really dealt with all of this huge amount of stuff that you're still carrying around inside your system. And to current science, if you changed how you are right now, then everything's good again. But As a lot of people who get into breath work are starting to discover, is like just nasal breathing is really not enough, and that certainly is my experience. You need to be willing to go on a journey with the breath. And it's actually not the case that you need to use these invigorating breath techniques. You might want to do another type of body-based therapy, such as bioenergetics. You might want to use Reichian techniques. You might want to use, there's actually pranayama techniques I work with a lot, that use the muscles of the belly to go in and out with the breath and starts to get into that primal knot down there. There's all sorts of techniques you can use. So these basically are some of my thoughts on this mouth, nose breathing discussion, argument, whatever. It's good to understand the difference between breathing you're using for therapy and breathing you're doing day to day. And it's really important to try not to use these muscles around here. If you're busy with your daily breathing, look how can you engage your abdominals, which is a journey. Like I say, you may need to go on quite a deep inner journey to get some of the holding out of these muscles such that your body, your center of gravity can come right down. Okay, thank you for tuning into this video. Do check out my website and my books on Amazon, where there's online courses and all that kind of thing. Thank you.